All right, great. So we have a great panel. I'd like to introduce them. I'm not sure how we want to do this, if we want to have everybody come up, or I can introduce one at a time. Let's do it the latter. Okay. Your moderator this evening is Colleen Egan. Colleen is a decorated leader in the tech industry with current and former involvement in a number of technology-related organizations, such as 212 Degrees, Zula, and Clarity Partners. Thank you. We have Debra Schwartz as well. Debra is a managing director of impact investments at the MacArthur Foundation. Debra, thank you very much for coming. We have Emily Lawrence, who is a sustainable investing senior product specialist at Northern Trust Asset Management. Thank you. Gerri Kahnweiler is a founding partner at InvestHER Ventures. Thanks, Gerri. Thank you. Nicole Chavas is the CEO and co-founder of Greenprint Partners. Nicole, thank you very much. Okay. Purva Patel is a client portfolio manager for municipal fixed income strategies at Nuveen Asset Management. Purva, thank you. And last but not least, Tyra Jeffries is the founder and CEO at CreativeCap Advisors. Tyra, thank you very much. And Colleen, I will let you hit it. Yeah.
I might be double mic'd. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here this evening, and I really wanted to give a big shout out to Backstop Solutions for putting together this incredible evening with this incredible panel. As you mentioned, I work for Clarity Partners. My title there is the Director of People, Culture, and Endless Possibilities. So as you can see, I'm extremely proud of that because it embodies impact. My entire career has been about making an impact, whether it's the work I do, the organizations I volunteer for, or my employees. I work diligently to have an impact in their lives just to make the world a better place. Tonight, we're going to take an in-depth look at impact investing, and specifically whether investing in diversity and inclusion bolsters portfolio performance. Investors have been flocking for the last couple years to financial products that take into account a company's ethics, social responsibility, corporate governance, and environmental records. And a 2015 analysis by the University of Oxford showed that 72% of S&P 500 companies were reporting on sustainability, and companies with superior sustainability standards improved their access to capital. To put those numbers in perspective, from 1995 until now, ESG investing has grown from $639 million to $8.7 billion. Some of the issues that they're tackling are, affordable housing, climate change, sustainability, government effectiveness, and new economy jobs. I'm super honored and proud to be here with this esteemed panel. They've been leading this initiative for some people decades. So I look forward to the conversation we're having this evening, and we'll have a Q&A later so you can ask them some questions. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Everybody ready? I think we're going to start with our first question, and we thoughtfully looked at the questions that were presented, and we wanted to give a really in-depth look, but to give some real, life examples of what everyone on the panel has been doing. So I'm going to start with what does impact investing mean to you, and why does it matter? And Debra, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Colleen, and the Backstop team. It's great to be here. So I lead impact investing at the MacArthur Foundation. We're a large private charitable foundation, one of the largest in the United States. And we've allocated $500 million of our endowment, set it aside specifically for impact investments. And our primary use for that capital is to advance our own programs, like our work in Chicago, our work on climate solutions. In the past, we had a big initiative around affordable housing. We also use our capital to try to strengthen and develop the field of impact investing as a whole. And I think the animating reason that we've made such a strong commitment to impact investment is that we recognize that the problems that we face in the world today, they're big and they're complex and they're really tough. And we need to have all the tools in the box at our disposal. So it's not enough just to have grants, which is the typical thing that you think of when you think of a private foundation, is making grants. And it's not just enough to have conventional investments or even commercial impact investments like a publicly traded stock that's been screened for its environmental aspects. That's terrific, but there's this huge white space in between where we focus our impact investing, between grants, between market rate conventional investments, where we can be problem solvers and we can use the power of finance and the discipline that it brings and the leverage that it makes possible. These are the reasons for us to pursue impact investing. It gives us more tools to work with.
You actually were quoted as saying, our money is very patient. What does that mean?
So the type of impact investing that we pursue, we characterize as being catalytic capital. And what we mean by that is capital that's really tailored to the distinctive problems and challenges of impact-driven enterprises. And very often, it's not just patience, it's risk tolerance, because very often you have organizations that are working in incredibly difficult places, doing agricultural work in Rwanda, for example, where it's just not the same as doing agricultural work in Iowa. And so they need an investment that is willing to tolerate that added risk. Sometimes it's just something so new and innovative that they need that added risk tolerance. And we did an investment to help an organization that is pioneering a whole new way to finance hurricane fortification for families in places like Florida and all the places that need it. And I won't go into the details of how they set that up, but it just was unproven, and we felt that if we made an impact investment and they could get a demonstrated track record, then they might be able to eventually attract conventional capital once that track record was in hand. So sometimes we need risk tolerance for innovation. And sometimes the problem isn't the innovation or the context, it's just that they have slim margins, and so they can pay you back, but they need more time. It's just like when you stretch out a loan, right? That can give them the time so that the demand on their profits and their cash flow can be managed. And so we try to be patient, we try to be flexible, and we try to be risk tolerant.
Emily, would you like to continue on that?
Sure.
What does impact investing mean to you, and why does it matter?
Absolutely. So at Northern Trust, our sustainable investing thesis is that environmental, social, and corporate governance data and analytics can be additive to the traditional portfolio construction process. And we look at this across a variety of asset classes. Within that context, we believe that diversity creates value. We believe that entities that are considering climate as a potential risk are going to be better positioned to navigate challenges going forward. We think that a stable society, a healthy environment, and that well-governed, well-functioning companies are going to be long-term contributors to financial sustainability and environmental and social sustainability. So for us, this starts at home. We manage our own portfolio with our bank's balance sheet of impact-first investments, similar to what Debra's described, patient capital, looking for opportunities to create impacts in the communities in which we work and live. And then we also partner very closely with our clients to help them interpret what sustainable investing means to them, how it fits within their risk tolerance, their time horizon, and how we can support them as they move forward with implementing a sustainable investing strategy.
When I was researching you, I noticed that you have degrees in international conflict resolution and European politics and governance. Was that a big part of you going into impact investing?
I think it's a journey, right?
Yes.
So I started my career or my educational journey with a degree in French literature, which is not a traditional financial background by any means. But I did get the opportunity to spend a year studying abroad in France from 2001 to 2002, which was an extremely interesting kind of geopolitical year and an interesting time to be a 20-year-old living abroad. So certainly wanting to continue that journey, be someone who'd had some international experience, digging into political science, digging into different relationships between states and private actors and the environment and society, certainly brought me to this space. But that was a while ago, and this space has evolved significantly since then. And so what I think keeps me here is that it is evolving, it's challenging. I get to learn something new every day. I get to work with really passionate and engaged clients who have really strong convictions around a lot of these issues. And so it's an extremely rewarding space to spend your career.
I know what that is. Life is a journey. I started as a nurse, so I've taken a very unconventional journey. Would you like to go next, Gerri?
Sure. So I am the founder and general partner of InvestHER Ventures, which is a venture capital fund based here in Chicago, which invests in tech companies that are founded by women. We do not look at ourselves as impact investors because we think we're doing investing that makes the most sense. The difference is that many in the VC world do not think that women make good investments for many different reasons, which we can go into at a different time. The pitching is different, the way they talk about their business is different, and we have found great opportunities with women and the companies that they're developing in the tech space. We have half our portfolios in the Midwest and the rest is around the country with one company up in Canada.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So my background prior to starting what is now Greenprint Partners was in investment management. I worked for a firm that managed portfolios for foundations and endowments, and just became really passionate about impact investing. And it was a very nascent concept. And I just wanted to find a way to align my work with my values. And so I went out there and said, where are there jobs in impact investing? And there were none. Nobody worked in impact investing. It was just an idea. So I realized I had to make my own job in it if I wanted to do it. So I went to Kellogg and met my co-founders and further realized that what we didn't need was impact investors. What we needed was deal flow. We needed investable projects, investable products that could then attract impact investment. And so that has led to Greenprint Partners, which is we are a project developer of green infrastructure for stormwater management. So we design, build, and finance green infrastructure, which is the use of nature to help manage stormwater to reduce flooding and pollution for cities at scale. And I think the other big learning for me in that process was that impact products do not magically appear to be scalable, completely investable, providing mainstream profitable returns. It's a spectrum of building a market to get to that point, and the space we're in is very early. And so we have to rely on blended finance, on patient capital, on kind of true impact investment to get to a point for what will hopefully be a mainstream, boring investment that's just driving impact and also generating risk-adjusted returns. So that's where I see this critical part of my role in the broader impact investing space.
Thank you. Purva.
Yeah, I'm the mainstream, boring investment strategy, and that's okay. I think there's a place for that too, because we represent mutual funds that do impact investing. We are getting ready to roll out a municipal separately managed account that is a ESG focused, and I think there's an important place for that in terms of moving ESG and responsible investing forward. And there's a lot of dollars there that we can kind of move from traditional investments that don't have that focus into this kind of investment strategy. And I think that's going to take a little bit of time, because there's a myth out there that you're not necessarily going to get the same kind of returns that you would if you didn't have this kind of restriction on your investment universe. And so that's the myth that I think we, as the investment firms that represent these products, are challenged with. And I think that's the learning curve that we're going to be working on for the next few years at least. And I think ultimately in the long run, impact investing is going to be the way that we invest, period. And so it's not going to be in impact investing or responsible investing. It's just going to be investing. And we're going to demand from issuers and corporations that they conduct themselves in a certain way that is responsible for our communities. So I think that's the long-term goal, but in the short term we have these challenges, and that's where a lot of the work is done with my team.
You're on the bond side, correct?
Yes.
Right. So think about I work on the public sector side right now with local, city, state governments. making government work better for its constituency, right? Anything in the bond market that's really attractive right now on the impact side?
Well, there's a lot of things, and I think there's not a lot of attention, especially my focus really is on the municipal side, and we were just talking about that in terms of clean water. But there's not a lot of work being done there just yet. And so, we have other competitors that are bringing out products, but they're just completely removing certain sectors of the market. And that's not really a thoughtful way to approach the market. What we've done is we are owned by TIAA, and they have 5 decades of responsible investing experience. And so we've leveraged that and used their experience and developed our own proprietary methodology that aligns with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 goals, and so our themes and our investment strategies are going to align with those. And so we are looking for those general obligations that are cities, states, counties, or we're looking for the water and sewer debt that's above and beyond. They're doing things beyond just what's required, and so we're looking for the cream of the crop, essentially. And I think ultimately our philosophy is that it will reduce volatility in clients' portfolios because these are the best run securities or the best run issuers out there, and that should smooth client return experience.
Thank you. Tyra, what does impact investing mean to you?
Well, so just by way of introduction, I am founder and CEO of CreativeCap Advisors, and we're a global business advisory firm for asset managers, and we've also launched the world's first emerging manager incubator. So a lot of my perspective is coming from advising and working with managers who are doing all these wonderful things in terms of impact investing. So, and what's also quite interesting is talking to managers not only within the US, but also within Latin America, where we see a lot of this impact investment style, whether it's talking about microfinancing or focusing on other ways to invest for the social good. Additionally, I guess on a personal level, I would define impact investing really to start at a philosophy. For a lot of the clients and the types of firms that I work with is really how are you defining what it means to look at an investment and whether it's going to be allocated or you're going to invest and add into your portfolio. So I think really it has to start there. And I also deal with, venture capital firms, private equity, and hedge funds. So it's obviously, there's nuances to that and really defining what impact investing is. But what's really interesting is I think, and I believe that it starts at the philosophy. And, are you looking at companies that are doing something, tremendous that falls within the category of impact investing, but also looking at the social good as sort of what Purva was alluding to, and the fact that, it's not, to identify any sort of investments that would fall within that category, you also want to assess it in the sense of, not just can it provide, solid returns. And I think sometimes in working with a lot of different clients and that are even migrating some of their strategy or looking to package themselves as an impact investing or ESG style firm is really trying to understand what does that mean. How do I assess companies? How do I, become identified as ESG, or how do I not become identified as an ESG style firm? And I think, a lot of the different firms that we've worked with struggle with further identifying what that is, but I really do believe impact investing starts with the philosophy. Are these companies doing something that's really impacting our society? And I think that's critically important in further analyzing whether you're a firm that partakes in impact investing. And as an institution or institutional investor, when you're looking to invest in these types of strategies, really where does it start? Is it the philosophy? Is it just the companies that they're investing in? So really breaking it down even further and getting more detailed into analyzing what is really, ESG hedge fund, or what is really a venture capital firm that focuses on the social good. We have an incubatee who's based out of New York and is owned by a woman, and she's done incredible things focused on, and as she defines it within hers, she says, I look at companies that are impacting the social good, simply put. And I think it's critically important when we're looking at all different types of companies. people define it differently. So, when you're doing your due diligence, within that framework, how are you understanding that to be too? So I would say it really starts with the philosophy.
I'm glad you brought up philosophy in the incubator because it's the first of its kind in the world, right?
Yes.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
But we talked a little bit earlier about the education starting. You're having an impact already, right, on impact investing.
Right.
But how much of that is on the education side dedicated to diversity and inclusion?
Right, so that comes up. So when we are actively working with a lot of institutional investors, that comes up quite frequently, more on the investment consultant side. We see a lot of curiosity into looking at some of our managers as what types of initiatives have we put into place. But honestly, when we created the program and we created our class, we just, in many ways looked at it from a blind perspective. And we've been able to build with just 5 funds within our first class. It's incredibly diverse. So, I mean, we have, 2 of the 5 funds are run by women. So, and one of the funds that's run by a male is a minority. He's from Saudi Arabia originally. So you're, with that all being said, I think that, really looking at impact investing and further understanding, how people integrate into their portfolio is all very important. And like I said, it starts with the philosophy. So with our incubator, I think there's a high level of integrity across the board for every single incubatee, and that's important. Not all of them focus on ESG, but all of them, for a huge amount, or the majority of them, have integrated a level of integrity or a level of how they're analyzing companies to invest in within their core philosophy and within their investment philosophy.
Thank you. When we look at ESG, there's a lot of issues, a lot of problems in the world, a lot of solutions to be found. But what do you guys think are the most pressing problems in the world today? And anybody can start. That's a big question.
I think it's hard to force rank the problems of the world. It's just,
Yes.
There's so many important problems that need to be tackled. But I think right now it's really interesting to me to see the gender inequality spotlight in the United States. And I think that's going to be, it's kind of exciting to see that right now because I feel it. I work for an investment management firm. And, the way that it's structured is, there's a lot of middle-aged white men that work there, and there's a very small proportion of women in that firm. And I feel like that is actually changing, and they're shifting, and there's a little bit of thought shift at the leadership level that is really important right now, and I think that's really exciting. And so I don't know if that's the most important, but it's definitely something that's exciting, and really I feel a shift happening, and that's pretty cool.
To your point, I think the Me Too movement and Time's Up has really forced a lot of companies to look at, social issues and tackle those. Mm-hmm. I mean, would anybody agree with that, or have you seen anything change dramatically in investing because of it?
I think in general, this growing interest to move towards sustainability is also a growing interest to move towards better transparency. Right? You want to know what you own. You want to understand how it ties into your value drivers. There have been some really interesting studies that have come out over the past few years, a couple of McKinsey studies that point to the higher levels of profitability that come from diverse populations. And one of those studies really focusing in on gender, but then the follow-on study focusing in on gender and ethnicity and how those populations coming together as you have a broad mix of individuals, they challenge each other. They make their ideas better and more refined, and then ultimately they're more innovative. And so as we think about the potential of the opportunity space, and Gerri, you articulated this really well, investing in women is good business. Investing in diverse communities and diverse populations, we're seeing better data borne out around the ability of those populations to come together and produce better outcomes. So I think we're seeing a better sort of broader adoption, a better sense of awareness that is in fact the case, and we're seeing more demand to see that within our investments. I thought it was interesting when Chad mentioned that it's the IT sector that has the the biggest challenge when it comes to gender diversity. Certainly asset management is up there too. And as we think about that, both as a firm and as an investment manager, I think it's important that we think about that next step of where asset owners are moving. Asset owners are becoming increasingly diverse. They're going to work with or want to work with increasingly diverse populations of individuals. They will understand and demand that we seek out that innovation driver by bringing better mixes of the population together. And so as we think about those next steps as a firm, it's important for us to embrace that, to think about that as a differentiator in attracting and retaining talent, and to go out and try to, sort of better create that pipeline within the investment management space.
I've lived in VC world like Gerri, and it's like usually I'm the only woman on the C-suite, right? Which is getting a lot better. But I've seen billions of dollars go into photo sharing apps and dating applications or food delivery by a bunch of guys that are creating these, right? But I don't see any money going into like women's health. Well, it's better now, but women's health or reproductive health, economic empowerment. I think I'd like to speak to that with you, Debra. I mean, what is the MacArthur Foundation doing?
So, as I said, our impact investments really follow our program lead. And so we try to have synergy between the grant making that we're doing and the various strategic initiatives that we have underway, and injecting the impact investing as an added tool and way of having more impact and finding complementarity. So we don't have a grant-making program currently that's focused on women's empowerment, but we have generally, as a charitable foundation, a strong focus on poverty and empowerment overall of people that are, whether they're people of color or people living in disadvantaged parts of our city. And so our impact investing has followed there. So maybe I just give you a couple of concrete examples. And I would just say that I've really been struck over the last few years by the rising interest in what is called gender lens investing within the impact investing space. So I do think, to your earlier question, I think there's been a sea change and will continue to be a sea change, and it sounds like you're seeing it on play out on the client side. That is not a particular focus for us, but many of our investments are targeting populations where you have a proportion of women, low-income women, and so forth. But just a couple of examples, and this maybe is more to the general question of diversity and inclusion and how that can play out. We created a fund 2 years ago called Benefit Chicago. And the whole concept behind that fund was to provide a very turnkey, simple way for a donor-advised fund, an individual, an institution that wanted to be involved in very high-impact investing to be able to have the opportunity to channel their dollars into a fund that would be managed by my team. And we have 30 years of history. We started making impact investments in Chicago in 1986. We've made them around the world, but Chicago is our hometown and always been a focus. So some of the things that fund is invested in include a social enterprise that's owned by a nonprofit on the west side of Chicago. It's called Sweet Beginnings. And what that business is, it was created to provide employment and experience for mostly men and some women who are returning from prison, who are ex-offenders, and for whom the employment barriers are just immense. And Brenda Palms-Barber, an incredibly visionary African-American woman, created Sweet Beginnings and realized that one thing that she could train people to do where they could come in with no skills and no job experience and get that opportunity to work was to train them to raise bees. And so they do. They're raising bees on the west side of Chicago, and they're using the honey to sell at Whole Foods and Mariano's, and they're making honey-based personal care products. And we provided them with a working capital loan to help them upgrade their marketing and their facilities, and they're seeing some pretty nice growth in their sales. And more sales for them translates directly into more employment opportunity for people who need it. But another example is inclusion of another kind is a company called Autonomy Works. And it's a for-profit social enterprise. It's in the suburbs. And what it's designed to do is provide quality employment experience for adults with autism. And it's a digital marketing support business, and they've discovered that actually the characteristics that make somebody unusual if they have autism actually make them phenomenal in this particular type of very detail-minded work. And so again, we provided financing to what was actually a fast-growing company that had no track record and couldn't get bank financing. And so we are able to give them that, and we imagine, very much as somebody was saying before, that they are going to grow and be able to get to a place where they don't need our type of impact investment. They'll be able to have the scale and the economies of scale and the profitability that will allow them to attract conventional financing. But for now, we've done a very unusual type of loan that is where the repayment is a percentage of revenues. It's a very creative structure, and it's really designed for this kind of business. I would just say that it's not always the case that everything is going to progress to where it has market rates of risk-adjusted return. And somebody noted that there's a spectrum, and I think that's really important to keep in mind, because as people get excited and hyped about impact investing, it's very easy to believe that it's a myth that there are trade-offs. The actual truth is sometimes there are trade-offs. So we have another borrower of ours in Chicago, but they also work across the country, and it's an organization called Self-Help out of North Carolina. And they came in the wake of the financial crisis and were able to put back together a 100-year-old bank that had been the bedrock of the Latino community in Chicago and provided incredible trusted service to those, to the small businesses and families that lived in Bridgeport and Little Village and back of the yards. And it had fallen under during the financial crisis, and there were 1,200 families that had mortgages from that bank that were at risk. And Self-Help came in as a mission-driven credit union and was able to put the bank back together again and then use very high touch and probably very costly relative to what other banks would do approach to working with all the families. And 90% of these families, so many of whom were at risk of foreclosure, 90% stayed in their homes. And then the bank has gone on to introduce other new products. They provide loans for people seeking citizenship. They even provide loans to dreamers that can't come up with the money to pay for the fees that are involved in that application process. Last year, we provided another loan to the same organization because they've acquired the branches and deposits of Seaway, which is a bank serving the African American community. And they're now bringing used car loans, which is not available in the marketplace, but to be able to finance your used car at a low rate is incredibly valuable to somebody with low income. They're providing church loans, which is, again, just not available in the community. So
you're bridging that gap.
They are really bridging the gap. They're really serving the African American community. They're really serving the Latino community. That's diversity and inclusion in our minds. And it's the loans that we had to make that possible are 15-year loans. Remember I talked earlier about the long time horizon. And they're 1%. They're actually, from our underwriting, quite secure. The risk on them is not high because of the scale of Self-Help as an organization is a $3 billion mission-driven credit union. So we're actually not worried about the risk level, but we've tailored the return and we've tailored the duration to the needs of the organization. So that's a long way to say I think there are many opportunities to bring diversity and inclusion through impact investing, and we're doing that, but we tend to go to where we find gaps, and that's really kind of our mantra, is to try to find the problem and bring the tool that works.
Two topics that you brought up, which are important for me as the leader of people and culture where I work, is we have a 0% interest loan program. I have a 52% minority workforce. And sometimes just, loaning someone $500, $600, $700 to help them move into, they want to move apartments into a better community, better school for their children, but it's the difference between $500. And so since I started, I was like, well, then why do we give them a loan? And it's 0%. But I was like, let's just start a grant program and just give them the money. We won an award for, the work that we do with our Clarity Cares program for that very reason. Another thing, too, is Kara. the CARE program, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. We work in conjunction with them. People coming out of prison can't get jobs. People coming out of homelessness go through a training program. I mean, these are small things that, you know, your companies can do, or work with organizations in your community to support, you know, programs like CARE. I've had great success getting people and helping their families succeed. You know, it's generational success, we hope.
So I think that it's really an important and fuzzy line to think about when does it make sense to give someone a grant, and when does an impact investment make sense? And there's no science to that. But, you know, and I would say if you're at the place where the only thing that's going to work is a 0% loan, you're really close to that line where probably you should be thinking about a grant. For us, we find that giving someone an investment or a loan can be very important if they're trying to prove out their viability to the next lender who's coming afterward. We find that it brings a lot of discipline. And we find that it gives us the power of recycling. So we have made over $500 million of impact investment commitments since 1986. And we've had almost $200 million of repayments. That $200 million can come back and be redeployed. And that is very powerful. So if it's good for the organization, and that's important, and you can then have that recycling, that's a strong rationale to go that route.
That's a great point. And after we give out, you know, once they hit that mark, we have a financial wellness program that we enroll them in automatically to help them with that.
Yeah.
Gerri, on the venture side, pressing problems in the world today that you guys are solving?
Well, one of the major problems that we are trying to solve with my firm is the access to capital for women on the venture side. It is very true that it is difficult for women to raise money. And so our firm, by putting our stake in the ground here in Chicago, we have said it is important to invest in women. They return higher returns, using less money, they get to profitability sooner, and we believe in them. And so we have been able to then introduce our founders to other investors and make them take notice of the investors. You know, the problems that my companies are solving are often not just business problems, but just business problems. They're not out there trying to save the world. I have a company in the trucking business, a company in agriculture, a company working in market research. So they are really women who have seen problems, usually from their working days, and thought, oh, I bet technology can solve this problem. And then they've gone at finding a way to see if that is true.
And to Gerri's point, think about VC investments. Less than 2% of women received VC money last year. And when we think about it, since 2009 to today, 0.0006, 0.6% of black women have received VC money. It's a pressing problem for me, so I thank you for what you're doing. Anybody else like to answer what they think is a pressing problem in the world today, or what's most important to you in solving things? I think you're probably great at talking about what your company's doing.
Yeah, I can speak to the problem we're trying to solve and how I actually came to it. You know, the environmental problem we're solving is the problem of stormwater runoff, water pollution, and urban flooding. But my personal passion that brought me to that was not even environmental, it was social. I'm very passionate about sustainable urban communities, particularly underserved communities. My husband used to be an urban planner in Gary, Indiana, and that's actually what drove me to impact investing, was this question of how can I find ways to bring creative investment to a community like Gary, Indiana, that is facing so many challenges economically, racially, educational, all these things, environmentally, with the legacy of the steel mills there. And as I looked at the challenges they were facing, as I looked at all the things that a city like Gary needs, or the south side of Chicago, or Flint, Michigan needs, what became very clear to me is that, you know, before the people of Flint, Michigan can even think about how to invest in their education, how to create jobs, they need to have water that they can drink. And the city of Gary needs to be able to, limit environmental contamination from industrial pollution. And if you can't even, live comfortably day to day because of these environmental factors, how can you actually do the next things to make a thriving, sustainable community? And so that's what really brought me to infrastructure and to our environmental infrastructure and our built environment as the thing that needs to be invested in first to be able to lift up communities, to be able to do these other things. And green infrastructure just happens to be this really multidimensional way of addressing that issue. So not only is using nature to help manage water and flooding just a great environmental solution, it's cost effective, it's distributed, it's adaptable. In the face of climate change, it's probably the best tool we have to help our cities adapt. But when you green communities, there's all sorts of studies that show that you improve health outcomes, you improve social cohesion, you improve safety. There's a study in Baltimore that by planting more trees, crime was reduced in certain neighborhoods by 12%. So just the use of nature itself to address one problem actually has all these other impacts that can address a whole host of other problems that create really cohesive, sustainable, thriving communities. And if you really focus those efforts on the communities that need them the most, that's where you're going to have the most impact. And so that's what's driving me as a company. It's not even purely an environmental focus. It's a social and economic focus, but it just happens to be driven by an environmental solution.
I agree, and I think the MacArthur Foundation gave a Genius Grant to Jeannie Gang, primarily for a lot of what you just spoke about. Tyra, pressing problems that you guys are looking at.
Yeah, so, on the manager side and dealing with, many passionate entrepreneurs who are solving and really are on the ground executing a lot of, what we're defining as ESG and impact investing, the question becomes access to capital. And for a lot of people that are out there that have created these businesses that are, implementing different ways to impact their local communities, always when I'm speaking to them, their biggest issue is really about, access to capital. And how do you create an environment where there is, obviously there are several different institutional investors that are allocating to the different ESG initiatives and different types of impact investing, but it's also critically important, for really understanding on the manager side, how to pitch to investors to illustrate not only am I doing something for the social good, but I'm also generating a return. And every single institution is different in how they're reviewing these different types of funds. But that's always a critically important issue, because I don't think that there is necessarily a lack of people who are ready to go out there and do something to change the world or change local communities or change their societies. It's really about creating the right programs and finding the right partners, which sometimes when that gets lost, that can derail, a fantastic opportunity to change your community. And I think that's a common thing that, and on my side, that I've seen a lot with different types of funds that we work with.
Let's stay with that. How can we unlock more capital into women-run companies? Yeah, it's a tough one.
So we work with manager programs, and as we've already discussed, there's a significant challenge in diversity and inclusion within the asset management space. We had a client come to us a couple of years ago, an endowment that had this conundrum of we're trying to use women and minority-owned manager programs to create more diversity, to provide more access to capital, to hope that there will create this, sort of pipeline for diverse individuals within the asset management space. They've been doing it for decades and hadn't really seen it come to fruition the way that they'd hoped, right? You're not seeing more women or people of color within the asset management population. You're not seeing those funds grow and perform to, your hopes and expectations. And our due diligence team sort of took this back and thought about it. Having run women and minority-owned or emerging manager programs for a number of years, thinking about how can we look at diversity from a different perspective? How can we create a strategy that considers both performance from a financial perspective as well as a broader sort of cultural enthusiasm or demonstrated commitment to diversity and inclusion. And so they created this framework that we apply across our kind of standard due diligence process. And because these are managers that we allocate capital to, they are sort of beholden to provide us with information, right? So we ask them about their population. We want to know if they have a diverse population within their broader firm at the top of the house within their leadership team, but then also really specifically within their investment team. How is the diversity mix happening there? How are they looking at their commitment to their community? Are they working with local community boards or providing volunteerism hours? How are they thinking about where they apply their corporate capital? So are they working with women or minority legal firms or accountancy firms or things of this nature? And then we also want to know about ownership, but that isn't the only thing. We want to look at this a little bit more holistically. And the idea is to have really quantitative metrics. So who are the people there? Not just do you have a policy, but are you allocating dollars in an intentional and demonstrated way? And that really helps us get to know these managers better. It helps us understand more about the direction that they're moving. I think it gives us kind of an interesting position to provide them with feedback and insights ourselves. And I think it helps us reframe the conversation, not just from the top of the house, what does the leadership look like, but also let's look at large investment management firms. Let's look at ourselves. Let's think about where that sort of broadest impact can happen because they have the largest populations of individuals in the investment management space. And that's been a really powerful dialogue and a really interesting discussion to be a part of. We found that asset managers that are on our approved platform are very happy to participate. They really want to tell us what they're doing, and they find it really interesting and exciting that we're reviewing it.
Debra's in a much different position with the MacArthur Foundation because I think you've got a great track record already. With investing that money into women-led initiatives. Same thing with Gerri. You're only investing, InvestHER, invest in women. Everybody else, how do we unlock capital for women?
I think for us and the way that we look at responsible investing, it's part of the governance of the ESG. And if you look at Fortune 500 companies, there's still 12 companies that have no female board representation. I mean, that's pretty bad. Chad had some great numbers too. But the fact that we just don't have that kind of representation kind of skews us towards those companies that are making an effort towards diversity and inclusion, at least at the board level. And of course, we want to see it filtered down throughout the company. And so that's part of the due diligence that we are looking at each of these entities, whether it be a corporate issuer, whether it be publicly traded equity, or municipal issuer, like you were mentioning before, like a general obligation of a state or a local. What does their government look like? What does the board look like in terms of the city? Those things are really important now in terms of how we're looking to pick issuers to put into our portfolio. And I think as we start to gain more traction with investors, I think you'll start to see that shift happen. It's kind of like voting with your dollars, right? Mm-hmm. So the more we get interest here in these traditional, conventional type of investment vehicles, the more there's going to be a shift to change. And I think that's going to take some time, but it will happen. So we're starting with, we do a social choice bond fund. We have several equity strategies. We are rolling out this municipal strategy. So at the governmental level, that'll be something that'll be a force to be reckoned with as soon as we start to gain dollars here. But I think the more dollars, I know Northern Trust too, the more dollars we can kind of get moving in this direction, the faster we're going to see change.
And that's particularly powerful in the stewardship part of the dialogue. So it's not just about the selection of the entity that's going into the portfolio, it's also how you act as an owner of that entity. And so engagement, voting your proxies in an intentional way, communicating your goals and your view that diversity creates value to the companies in your holdings. We have a very intentional approach to stewardship. I sit on our proxy voting committee, and diversity and inclusion is one of the factors that we focus on as we engage with issuers.
And as a consumer, 20 years ago in investing, it wasn't easy for me to figure out exactly all the companies that my, 401k was investing in, right? And now it's so much easier. And I sit there and I teach employees too how to look at their portfolio and to see which companies they're investing in. As a consumer, I mean, I won't eat at certain restaurants, right? Or I won't buy my clothing from somewhere. And as female consumers as well, I mean, we're spending the dollars. We're doing most of the shopping, so the companies need to listen to us. Same thing with our votes. I mean, with Ballot Ready, it's so much easier to vote these days. And to know which judges to vote for that make, you know, those impacts in our communities, for the communities that you're really serving. Someone had mentioned earlier looking at companies tracking the social impact. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, how do you track companies with different social impacts to determine the best groups to invest in?
Not a popular question. It is. I mean, one of the things that's really hard about impact measurement, we were talking about this before, is, you know, I mean, for us in our portfolio, you know, we have one portfolio that is all place-based. It's just all around Chicago, has a strong theme around employment readiness, wealth building, but it's a pretty diverse portfolio. So in addition to the nonprofit that's, you know, got a business training ex-offenders to raise fees, and another guy employing adults with autism. We've got a company that is led by 2 women, one of whom is at the University of Chicago, and they're canvassing communities to identify resources for people who are getting medical services but need community-based services. So you have diabetes and you need a weight loss program, or you need an exercise program. So actually, through partnerships with hospitals, they can write prescriptions for these community-based services. And they employ a lot of young people in helping identify all the different hidden gems in a community that they can then link to these people coming out of hospitals. So that company's impact and impact measurements are going to be quite different than the one that is, you know, looking at what are the wages being paid, what's the employment trajectory for the people that are participating. This one is going to be looking at health outcomes for the participants in the program. And you're never going to be able to put that apple and that orange together and say, you know, there have been efforts to do this, to create, you know, social return on investment calculations. The newest is out of a fund called TBG Rise, and they have come up with what they call an impact multiple. And they use a lot of academic research, and they try to basically monetize the impact so that you can start to have a way of comparing, you know, to investments. But I think that the reality is you need the rigor of impact measurement and metrics, because, you know, if you're saying the reason that you're making this investment, the intention is to have a benefit to people who are going to become employed and have better incomes, well, then you better be tracking it, or you're not going to know if your intention is fulfilled. But I think at the same time, there's going to be subjectivity, and you could have 3 or 4 different programs that are all trying to have an employment impact. And at the end of the day, there isn't going to be a body of academic research that lets you say this one is 50% better than that one. I mean, you're going to do due diligence, and just like you would with any investment, you're going to exercise judgment and try to figure out, you know, what's the most prudent way to reach the impact that you're looking for. Thank you.
It's also going to work differently across different asset classes.
Yes.
So in a private, you know, investment in the venture space and the municipal bond space, you can be very geographically focused or very issue focused. You were talking about your 401k plan, and we work with a lot of plan sponsors around retirement solutions. They're working to find something that will work within their program, and that, you know, is going to be, in most cases, a large cap equity strategy. And so that's going to be a large, potentially global, diversified portfolio. Some of the impact measurement is going to be through those stewardship elements rather than, you know, through some of these more granular metrics that Debra's describing.
I think it's really interesting because, and it can also be very overwhelming because there's so many different kinds of ways to invest in social impact or impact investing or responsible investing. You can do microfinance, you can do a traditional mutual fund, you can do a lot of different things, and it becomes like
well, how do you want to do this? Like as an investor or as just a consumer, like what do you want to do? What's important to you? How much of an impact do you want to make? And there's this great spectrum of investable opportunities, which is so cool compared to maybe 10 or 15 years ago where we didn't necessarily have this kind of breadth of product or breadth of investment options.
And I would say, I think just to echo the sector point, I mean, we have one strategy right now that is tied to our climate solutions grant-making program. And so we've started making investments in India that are focused on helping that country fulfill its pledge at the Paris Climate Accords. And so it has to do with financing for off-grid solar in India. So we have stormwater here. You can't take stormwater, off-grid solar in India, and a low-income ex-offender with employment barriers, and sort of roll them all up. As Purva's saying, you have to, to me, this is why it's a lot like philanthropy. Nothing is going to balance all those things out and let you make that calculus. You have to decide what you believe is the most important and where do you think you can have impact. So you have to look at the dollars that you have, the risk tolerance that you have, the amount of money and time that you want to put into the work of making the investments, and find something that's meaningful for you, but that's also feasible. So that could be an ESG strategy, that could be investing with a manager, minority, emerging first-time manager, a manager who is a woman, or it could be coming into a fund like Benefit Chicago because you want to participate in some of the kinds of direct community engagement. I think all of them are good, and there's no substitute for sort of thinking about your own passion, what you care about, where you want to make change, because you can make change right at home and you can make change all around the world.
And in the VC space, there are angel funds that are designed with the fact to invest. It's women investing in women. So that's a way to take your dollars and join one of the angel funds. There are also, you can demand, if you wanted to be an LP and wanted to have less direct engagement, you can look for funds that value investing in women, and you can see it pretty easily by looking at their portfolio and seeing the mix of investments they have. So those are ways that you can get involved directly without having to go through a portfolio manager and some of the more things that you want to pay somebody a little bit more for because it's a little more complicated.
There's a product that I'll mention that is really good if you don't want to choose, and you just want to have a little bit of lots of kinds of impact and have it all be good. So there's an organization called Calvert Impact Capital. I mean, it's one that MacArthur is very proud, along with a few other foundations, to have helped launch way back 20 years ago. And they offer a retail note, so anybody can buy it. You don't have to be an accredited investor. And you can buy the note online in denominations starting at $20. You can buy it from your broker starting at $1,000. And that note raises capital for Calvert that they then go around the world and invest in microcredit, in women-owned businesses, in affordable housing, which is a great issue to think about, in variety of green efforts. And they have done $1 billion of financing over their 20 years. Every investor has been fully repaid in their principal and interest. So everybody has to make their own judgment, do their own due diligence. But I think it's a product worth knowing about, because if you're just getting started and you want to just do something, this is a really good one.
Anybody else? We only have, we have 5 minutes, really. We're just getting going here. Diversity and inclusion was the topic here today, or tonight, right? So I'd like each of you to close with a project you've worked on or something that you're extremely proud of that demonstrates the profitability of investing in diversity and inclusion.
I guess I'll start in this end.
Thank you.
Jump right in. Yeah. So, I think that one of the great projects that I get to work on is being able to help a woman-owned business find a way to grow and build and access institutional capital to utilize that capital to then invest in social good initiatives. And being able to just be a piece of that puzzle, even though she's the one who's actually going out and executing it, but helping to educate her and helping to, provide an environment where she can grow her business to be able to put more money to work to then invest into those types of businesses that are doing things for the social good is tremendous. I think with anything within ESG or impact investing is that education is really the core of, understanding of, first of all, what it is, but also on being able to source and find the right types of partners. So being able to be a part of that process and helping to drive forward any type of, not only her, but also other funds that invest in the social good and help him to build a business is very exciting. So.
To add to something, we talked about Arlen Hamilton earlier, which was the 31-year-old who went out to Silicon Valley, right? No degree, no money, no network, right? And now she's got a $36 million fund that she's only investing in women of color. But I love that she calls it's about damn time fund. So, yeah, I want money from her. Purva.
So projects, we're a little bit more big picture when it comes to investing, but I do have a personal story because, like I said, at Nuveen, we are an asset manager or investment management firm, and we're very heavily male-dominated. But yesterday I was in a panel in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was seated between two typical guys from the investment management business, and they're from different firms. One's from American Funds, and one's from the brokerage firm that was hosting the event. And we go through our panel, we're all acting nice, there's a little bit of mansplaining going on, and I let it go, I divert, I be the professional, but sure enough, at the end, we all go through our points, kind of like what we're going through right now, but we go through our take-home points, and he does his, I do mine, he does his, moderator's ready to close up, and then he over here decides to say, oh, by the way, you know what she said? We do all of that, and we also do this better, and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, wait a second. That's not going to fly for me. So I said, oh, wait a second. I have one last thing. And you know what he does? We do all of that, too. And it was such a just, kind of a funny little moment. But what I got this morning, I got an email from our relationship manager, and she said to me, your interaction yesterday on that panel, everyone's talking about it. And to me, it was just, if you're going to come into my lane, I'm going to nudge you back into yours. But I didn't think anything of it. But apparently, it made an impact. And so what happened with our relationship manager all day today, she's just been getting questions about our products. What do we have available there and that sort of thing. And, I looked at all the panels throughout the day, and I was the only woman, and I was the only person of color.
Yep.
And, it's too bad, but it's also great that I am able to do that. And I have that personal experience to kind of share and hopefully continue on throughout my career.
I remember one of my first, as a chief operating officer, and a client walked in and said, I'll take my coffee, with cream. And I'm like, oh, God. Right. So soon after, one of my employees, Gertrude Stein's partner, Alice Biotoklis, when she was talking about Gertrude Stein once, she said, she's all woman and twice the man. So I hang that in my office.
I like it.
Personal story.
Great, yeah, so one thing I wanted to call out was the use of the word profit. So I think in the impact space, a lot of projects, the revenue stream that's making something investable is actually coming out of potential taxpayer money or low-income communities. And so I don't like to think of it in terms of maximizing profit. I like to think about it in terms of generating a risk-adjusted return that makes projects scale, that delivers impact, but is not trying to, bilk the taxpayers and make more money off of them. And so for us, our projects, the revenue streams that drive our projects are coming from contracts with water utilities. And that's ratepayer money, that's taxpayer money. And so my mission is really to use that money in the most efficient way possible and make sure that it's distributed most equitably to deliver more sustainable projects. So an example of that is in St. Louis. The city of St. Louis has a massive need to reinvest in its water infrastructure, and it has a $100 million commitment to do that through green infrastructure. And the way they're doing that is through a program where They have $5 million a year of incentives available for any private property owner that installs green infrastructure on their property. So if you install green infrastructure on your property, you can apply for reimbursement from the water utility. It's an amazing financial incentive, and when we looked at that program, nobody was taking them up on it, and the people who were people of means or landowners of means. So the new IKEA was, installing green infrastructure and getting this money, and low-income communities, they didn't know about the program, they didn't know what green infrastructure was, they wouldn't be able to afford to hire somebody to do the work and then get the reimbursement. And so what we did is we came in and we actually played this project developer aggregator role, whereas we went out, we went to churches and social service centers in these low-income communities, signed them up, built a portfolio of projects, submitted it to the water utility, got projects approved, contracted with that water utility. We're getting financing against that contract to deliver those projects on those sites, and then we'll take that reimbursement. So making sure that these low-income communities are actually really well positioned to take advantage of these services that they're part of, the people paying for, and making sure that those projects are benefiting those communities that are really in the most need of those types of services. So that's how we think about how we can rethink about how capital gets distributed to make sure that it's benefiting those that need it the most.
I love your passion, Nicole. Gerri, closing comments or a story?
So as I said when I started, I don't think of myself as an impact investor because I think I'm investing in fabulous companies that will give me a great return. But through this discussion, I would say 2 of my companies would fall into this impact space. One is a company called Ballot Ready, which Colleen mentioned. I'd say it's probably really important for everybody in this room and for you to share it. It is, you type in your zip code, it will tell you your whole ballot. And it's nonpartisan, so it'll give you both sides. It'll give you all the candidates, a little blurb about them. You can make your own ballot, so when you go into the ballot box, you have your ballot in front of you. So it's a great company. It is a .org, you'll see, but it is a for-profit venture. The other company is a company called C-Note, and it's a savings platform. You get a bit of a higher interest rate on your savings, so that's great. If you care about saving at a higher rate than what the bank gives you, there you have that. But what she has done is she's invested in CDFIs, which are community development money that banks need to purchase. So she has invested in that community development money, and then that money is put to work funding entrepreneurs. She has a special interest in female entrepreneurs, so much of the notes that she's buying are funding female entrepreneurs. So those are the 2 companies that I have invested in that do have a social impact, but they're going to make me a lot of money in the meantime.
I'm going to give a plug for Ballot Ready, too, because midterms are upon us. But I used to spend hours, researching judges, which I feel is probably the more important thing to vote for out of anything that we're voting for. And it makes it easy for me now. I used to have to look for everyone's recommendations, put it together, and all my friends would call me for my ballot, to be ready. And now
just send it
doing
to
it, so it's great.
Yeah. And it's great if you have my daughter just moved to San Diego. She doesn't know who anyone is. So it's a perfect place for her because she wants to vote, and it's a perfect way for her to be able to figure out who fits her values and who she wants to vote for.
Emily, favorite experience that you've had with diversity and inclusion?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, this due diligence process, which ultimately does underpin an investment strategy that's oriented towards allocating capital towards managers that do have a track record of embracing diversity within their organization, which I do think is an extremely important theme and something that we're talking about a lot with our investment community. But then again, for us as individuals that work in the investment space as well. And so we've taken this approach that underpins an investment strategy, and we're now applying it to all of our due diligence mechanisms as just kind of a standard part of our process, which I think is a really important and impactful way to broaden out, what that impact is, to communicate to the investment community that these are important elements for us, and to ask ourselves these same strategies and questions as well.
Thank you. And Debra, we're going to close with you.
So I've shared a bunch of examples from our Chicago work, I mentioned our India work. The thing that I've spent most of my time at the MacArthur Foundation on with an initiative over almost 20 years focused on preserving and improving affordable rental housing across the United States. And it's the one I chose that I wanted to talk about, window of opportunity. And the thing that we know about this initiative is that almost all of the people who benefit from this housing represent some form of inclusion, because the people that need affordable rental housing are people who are low income, particularly seniors who are low income, people who are formerly homeless, people who are veterans, people with other kinds of physical special needs, and lots of women who are single heads of household, as well as women who are elderly, for sure. And over the course of 20 years and about $180 million, and a combination of mostly impact investments, but also some grants for research and policy and advocacy, we're able to help finance more than 150,000 homes across the country. And one time I had a chance to go to Minneapolis, to where one of the buildings that got financed was located. It was a building that had housed hundreds of low-income people for decades, but was running down, was falling apart. And Volunteers for America, a nonprofit that we financed, had done an incredible job of breathing new life into this property. And I met a woman there who sat and talked with me, and she had fled Katrina. She had been in the Gulf Coast. She had been wiped out by the hurricanes, and somehow got a bus ticket and found her way to Minneapolis. And she was a woman with mental health issues and disabilities. And the thing about Volunteers for America is they're not just a housing developer. They have a social worker on site. And this woman got connected with the social worker. She got a unit in the building. She talked to me about how she'd be able, with their help, to put her whole life back. And she basically just said to me, this building saved my life. And so we don't think about affordable housing as an inclusion strategy, but for me, I will never, forget what it had meant to that woman. And so when I think about that times 150,000 plus, I feel like that was a very big move on our part.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the panel. This was an incredible conversation. I think the impact that all of you are making, or is making our world better, and a round of applause.